I am Selena Murphy. I sit on the baking metal hood of a used sedan. The Midwestern humidity wraps around me like a wet wool blanket. The air in Columbia, Missouri is stagnant today. My black synthetic graduation gown traps the heat against my skin. In my right hand, I hold a master's degree in supply chain data analytics. The paper feels heavy. The embossed seal reflects the harsh afternoon sun. All around the parking lot, families are celebrating. Fathers are carrying bouquets of carnations. Mothers are adjusting the tassels on the caps of their children. Grandparents are taking photographs. My parents are nowhere to be seen. I unlock my phone screen for the fourth time. The glare of the sun makes it hard to read, but I know the arrangement of the words by heart. The text message from my mother Diane sits in my inbox. It arrived 10 minutes before the commencement procession began. "We are not going to make it, Selena," she wrote. "Brandon is hosting a tasting event for his brewery in St. Louis this afternoon, and he needs our support to network with distributors. Your graduation is just a piece of paper. It is pointless for us to drive all the way to Columbia when your brother is building a real legacy. We will take you out to dinner some other time." Pointless. The word hovers in the thick air. I look back up at the concrete walls of the university stadium. I spent 2 hours inside that arena staring at Section 3, Row 12. I claimed 2 aisle seats for Thomas and Diane. Those chairs remained empty while strangers clapped when the dean called my name. I do not cry. Tears are an evolutionary mechanism designed to solicit comfort from a supportive tribe. I do not have a tribe. Crying serves no functional purpose. Instead, my mind switches to the cold, calculated logic I developed to survive my own blood. I process the raw data of this rejection. My parents did not encounter traffic on Interstate 70. They did not experience a genuine scheduling emergency. They simply weighed the value of my legitimate academic triumph against the hollow illusion of my brother's success. They chose the illusion. Sitting on this sweltering asphalt listening to strangers cheer for their children, I calculate the exact moment I became an emotional orphan. It is right now. I accept the structural reality of my family. In the Murphy household, loyalty is not an unconditional given. It is a fixed asset, and Brandon holds 100% of the voting shares. I am nothing more than a write-off. If you are listening to this and you have ever been forced to finance your own survival because your family handed your seat at the table to the golden child, drop a comment and tell me where you are tuning in from right now. I read every single one. Let me take you back to how this specific fracture started and how a pointless degree handed me the exact weapon I needed to dismantle their financial mirage. The text message from my mother sits on my cracked phone screen, but the sting of it originates 4 years in the past. To understand why my parents chose a tasting event over my degree, you have to understand the exact exchange rate of my future compared to the ego of my brother. Brandon is 4 years older than me. He is the golden child of the Murphy family. He possesses a dangerous and effortless charm that makes rational people ignore objective reality. He wears expensive linen shirts that always look intentionally wrinkled. He speaks almost entirely in venture capital buzzwords. He talks about disrupting the beverage space and creating synergy while drinking overpriced imported coffee. He has never held a traditional job for more than 6 months. He finds standard employment stifling to his creative process. My parents view this chronic unemployment not as a failure, but as proof of his unrecognized genius. 4 years ago, I sat at the imported granite kitchen island of our suburban home. I was sorting through the online financial portal for my freshman year at the university. I needed to authorize the electronic transfer for my first tuition installment. I tracked my college savings account on a spreadsheet since I was 15 years old. I knew the exact balance was $45,000. I planned my entire educational trajectory around that specific figure. I logged into the banking portal. The screen loaded. The available balance read 0. I thought it was a routing error. I called my father Thomas into the kitchen. I asked him to check the joint account settings. He stopped wiping the granite counter. He did not look at me. He stared intently at the stainless steel refrigerator. The silence stretched out thick and suffocating. Then my mother, Diane, walked into the room carrying a stack of glossy marketing brochures. She set them down directly on top of my university housing forms. The cover read, Urban Hops and Artisanal Brewing Concept. That was the latest venture of Brandon. It was a lifestyle brand intended to sell overpriced craft beer to downtown influencers. I asked my mother where my tuition money went. I pushed the brochures aside. Diane sighed the heavy and practiced sigh she used to signal that I was being unreasonable. She folded her hands on the granite. She told me the college fund was liquidated and transferred. They did not ask my permission. They did not even plan to tell me until the exact moment I asked for the funds. Thomas finally looked away from the refrigerator, but he still would not meet my eyes. He told me Brandon was on the verge of something incredible in the downtown St. Louis market. He claimed the craft brewing industry was highly lucrative, and Brandon just needed seed money to secure a commercial lease. Thomas called it an investment in the family name. I reminded them that the money belonged to my education. My voice did not shake. I was too stunned to cry. Diane reached across the island and patted my hand. Her touch felt like ice. She told me I was naturally gifted and could take out student loans. She said Brandon is a visionary, but visionaries need capital to launch. She called his total lack of funds a temporary cash flow delay. She told me I was the practical one and they knew I would figure it out. You are the practical one was the Murphy family translation for you are on your own. I looked down at the glossy brochure. From the living room, I could hear the faint sound of Brandon playing a video game on the television. In that pristine kitchen, inhaling the scent of expensive citrus counterspray, a cold equation resolved in my mind. Love in the Murphy household was not unconditional. It was a finite resource and a fixed asset. Brandon held all the voting shares. I was not a daughter, I was a write-off. The artisanal brewing concept of Brandon was a masterclass in aesthetic deception. He secured a brick warehouse in the historic district of St. Louis. He possessed no brewing experience. He did not know how to operate a fermentation tank or source wholesale grain. He did not hire a master brewer. Instead, he hired an interior designer. He spent my college tuition on exposed Edison bulbs and distressed reclaimed wood tables and a copper bar top. He spent thousands of dollars on boutique public relations firms to market a product that did not exist. My reality became a stark and punishing contrast to his delusion. While Brandon curated his aesthetic, I scoured job listings. I found employment at a regional logistics warehouse on the outskirts of the city. My alarm triggered at 3:45 every morning. The digital clock glowed red in the dark of my cheap studio apartment. I tied heavy steel-toed boots onto my feet. By 4:30, I was standing on a concrete loading dock. The air always smelled of diesel exhaust and damp cardboard. I spent my mornings lifting 50-pound shipping crates and operating pallet jacks. I learned to ignore the deep ache in my lumbar spine and the calluses forming on my palms. I traded physical labor for textbook money. I worked the morning shift until noon and then took a bus to the university campus. I keyed in supply chain datasets in the computer lab until 8 in the evening. I ate stale protein bars for dinner. I measured my life in hours worked and dollars saved. Every penny was calculated. Every expense was justified. I existed in a state of perpetual exhaustion. Brandon lived a vastly different reality funded by my stolen future. He documented his entire life on social media. I would sit on the city bus staring at my cracked phone screen and watching videos of Brandon dining at expensive steakhouses. He captioned the photos with phrases about networking and the entrepreneurial grind. He posted curated photos of imported hops sitting unused in burlap sacks. He posed next to a leased luxury SUV claiming he was manifesting success. He portrayed the image of a thriving business owner while producing zero actual revenue and brewing zero actual beer. Diane made sure I knew all about his grueling schedule. She called me during my 15-minute break at the warehouse. I stood in the alley behind the loading dock, watching a garbage truck empty a dumpster. She complained about the rising cost of commercial utilities in St. Louis. She told me Brandon was under tremendous pressure meeting with local distributors. She said Thomas had to dip into their retirement savings just to keep the lights on at the empty brewery. She told me the poor boy is stressed, and visionaries cannot be bogged down by minor technicalities. I held my phone to my ear and reviewed my own bank balance in my mind. I had $38 to last until Friday. I asked her why he needed distributors if he did not have a product to distribute. The line went quiet. Diane snapped at me. She accused me of focusing on the negative. She said my pessimism was exactly why Brandon needed their support. Thomas shouted in the background, telling me to stop being bitter and let my brother build his empire. They told me not to ask them for any handouts. I had not asked them for a single dime since the day they emptied my college fund. I slid the phone into my pocket and went back inside to move another ton of freight. Their financial recklessness became the catalyst for my academic focus. I realized that fighting for a seat at their dining table was a losing metric. The cost of admission was my dignity, and the return on investment was bankruptcy. I stopped dealing in emotions. Emotions are liabilities. Emotions are the exact mechanism people like my parents use to manipulate you into accepting less than you deserve. I turned to the only language that could not be gaslit or manipulated or rewritten by my mother. I turned to numbers. Numbers follow strict rules. Data reveals the unbiased truth. A predictive algorithm does not care if you have a charismatic smile or a wrinkled linen shirt. It only cares about outcomes and probability. If the variables in an equation are toxic, the result will always be negative. My family was a toxic equation. If I stayed entangled in their drama, my variable would always be set to 0. I decided to build a model that quantified failure. I wanted to understand the anatomy of a collapsing investment. Growing up in the Murphy household taught me how to spot a liar. I knew how to identify a person who masked their incompetence with charm. I decided to code a machine to do the exact same thing on a corporate scale. My decision to quantify failure required an environment free from the illusions my parents worshipped. I rented a 300-square-foot apartment in an industrial sector of St. Louis. The unit sat directly above a 24-hour commercial laundry facility. The floorboards vibrated every time the industrial extractors entered a spin cycle. The air in my room constantly smelled of warm lint and chemical bleach. I used the relentless hum of the machinery below my bed as a metronome for my focus. I returned from my grueling warehouse shifts with aching joints and bruised palms. Instead of sleeping, I opened my laptop and stared at the glowing screen until my vision blurred. Physical exhaustion became a profound catalyst for my academic discipline. I channeled every ounce of fatigue into lines of code. The supply chain analytics program I designed for my final academic thesis was not built to track standard retail trends or consumer confidence. Standard metrics are too easily manipulated by public relations firms and marketing executives. I wanted to engineer a system that looked beneath the surface of a balance sheet. I wanted to identify the hidden microfractures in commercial supply chains. Supply chains are the circulatory system of any business. A company can lie in a press release, but they cannot lie about their freight manifests. They cannot fake their warehouse turnover rates. If a business is failing, the rot always starts in the supply chain long before the board of directors acknowledges the deficit. My objective was to predict the collapse of over-leveraged business ventures by tracking that invisible rot. I spent the bleak winter months feeding my algorithm the public financial data of regional startups across the Midwest. I scoured municipal tax filings and vendor payment histories, tracing the flow of capital through complex corporate networks. I programmed the system to recognize the subtle behavioral shifts that precede insolvency, mapping the timeline of decay. I trained the code to ignore marketing hype entirely. The algorithm disregarded follower metrics and charismatic executive interviews. It did not care about the aesthetic of a brand or the empty buzzwords scattered across an investor pitch deck. It stripped away the vanity and focused entirely on raw operational truth. It calculated cash burn velocity against actual inventory movement, ensuring the physical goods matched the stated revenue. It measured the exact duration a company delayed payments to essential suppliers. while simultaneously increasing executive compensation packages. It looked for the precise moment a business stopped operating as a functional enterprise and started operating as a hollow shell designed only to enrich its founders. Refining the logic pathways required intense isolation. I drank bitter instant coffee and ate generic saltine crackers at a thrifted folding table, measuring my progress in lines of verified code. I ignored phone calls from my mother complaining about the rising commercial utility bills at the empty brewery. I isolated my mind from the toxic drama of the Murphy household. The code grew sharper with every iteration. It evolved from a passive diagnostic program into an active predictive engine capable of seeing the future through the lens of historical data. It learned to spot the difference between a temporary market fluctuation and a terminal structural collapse. It learned to identify founders who operated exactly like my brother. It flagged companies that prioritized expensive leased equipment over functional logistics and sustainable growth. The algorithm became a mirror reflecting the fundamental truth that incompetence cannot hide from mathematics. By early spring, the architecture of the software was sound. I needed a live test subject to verify the accuracy of the predictions. I selected a highly publicized agricultural technology firm based in the rural outskirts of Missouri. The company was the darling of the regional business journals. They manufactured automated irrigation systems and had recently secured a highly celebrated Series B funding round. The chief executive officer frequently appeared on local news segments discussing rapid expansion and market dominance. My father often referenced their success during our rare phone conversations, using them as an example of entrepreneurial spirit. The agricultural firm projected an image of flawless stability and boundless growth. I sat at my folding table on a Tuesday night and pointed my algorithm at their corporate structure. I fed their publicly available shipping manifests and vendor disclosures into my software. I pressed execute. The cooling fan on my cheap laptop screamed as the processor struggled to handle the complex calculations. The system analyzed their freight costs against their actual product delivery rates. It cross-referenced their component import delays with their outbound sales volume. The program ran for 18 excruciating minutes while the floorboards beneath my feet vibrated from the laundry machines downstairs. The final results populated on my screen in stark white text against a black background. The air left my lungs. The algorithm assigned the agricultural technology firm a 92% failure probability. The data revealed a catastrophic reality hidden behind their glossy corporate facade. The company was burning through their venture capital to cover basic operational debt. They were holding vast amounts of unusable inventory in expensive leased warehouses. They were delaying payments to the overseas manufacturers who supplied their critical irrigation components. The executive team was quietly exercising their stock options while publicly reassuring their investors. The math was definitive and unforgiving. The company was bleeding out, and nobody in the financial sector knew it yet. I closed my laptop. I did not publish the findings. I did not send an email to my university advisors. I sat in the dark and listened to the hum of the building. I waited to see if my code possessed the power of foresight. 3 weeks later, the local news broke the story on a Thursday morning. I was riding the city bus to my logistics job when the headline appeared on my phone screen. The agricultural technology firm abruptly halted all operations. The board of directors filed for emergency bankruptcy protection. The chief executive officer resigned in disgrace. The venture capital investors lost their entire stake. The regional financial sector was stunned by the sudden and unexpected collapse. Business journalists scrambled to understand how a company with such promising momentum disintegrated overnight. I stared at the digital article as the bus rattled over the potholes of downtown St. Louis. The rest of the world viewed the bankruptcy as a sudden tragedy. I knew it was simply the inevitable conclusion of a failed equation. My program worked perfectly. It was not a theoretical academic exercise designed to secure a passing grade. I realized the profound magnitude of what I had created. I possessed a functional weapon. The algorithm was a diagnostic tool capable of identifying distressed corporate assets before human analysts even suspected a problem. Investment banks and private equity firms spend tens of millions of dollars trying to develop systems with half the accuracy of the code sitting on my hard drive. I held the key to predicting corporate decay. I held a proprietary asset worth billions to the right corporate acquisition firm. The realization shifted the entire gravity of my existence. I was no longer just a warehouse worker struggling to pay for textbooks. I was the sole architect of a paradigm-shifting technology. But with that power came an immediate and chilling vulnerability. I knew the inherent nature of my family. I understood the relentless entitlement of Thomas and Diane. If my parents discovered I possessed a piece of intellectual property with immense monetary value, they would not congratulate me. They would lay claim to it. They would demand I sell the algorithm to the highest bidder and use the capital to bail out the failing brewery of my brother. They would expect me to surrender my breakthrough to fund the linen shirts and leased luxury vehicles of Brandon. They would twist the narrative and frame the surrender of my software as my duty to the family legacy. They would weaponize my own intellect against me just as they had weaponized my college savings. I encrypted the hard drive containing the algorithm. I backed up the source code on 3 separate offline servers hidden in a secure lockbox. I made a solemn pact to keep the breakthrough entirely secret from my parents. Silence became my greatest tactical advantage. I let them believe I was still drowning in physical labor and academic stress. I allowed Diane to continue lecturing me about the brilliant vision of Brandon. I absorbed the condescension of my father without offering a single word of defense. The dynamic of the Murphy household shifted in the shadows. They continued to treat me like a disposable background character, while I quietly held the keys to a financial empire. Every time Brandon posted a pretentious photo of his empty warehouse, I refined my code. Every time my parents ignored my struggles to cater to his delusions, I optimized the logic pathways of my software. The exhaustion of my double shifts fueled my determination to build an impenetrable future. The secret sitting on my desk transformed my resentment into cold calculation, preparing me for the moment I would finally step into the light. The university lecture hall feels like a cavern on a late Thursday afternoon. I stand at the wooden podium facing a panel of 4 distinguished professors. These are veteran academics who have spent decades analyzing economic models and corporate behaviors. I do not offer them a polite introduction or a nervous preamble. I step directly into the data. I project the architecture of my predictive algorithm onto the wide screen behind me. For 2 hours, I dissect the anatomy of business failure. I walk the panel through the precise mechanisms my software uses to expose supply chain decay. I demonstrate the live simulation I ran on the agricultural firm, proving my code identified their insolvency weeks before the public bankruptcy filing. I speak with the clinical detachment of a surgeon operating on a balance sheet. The panel sits in profound silence. They do not interrupt with standard academic critiques or requests for clarification. They recognize the lethal efficiency of the mathematics I placed in front of them. The lead professor pushes his glasses up the bridge of his nose and stares at the cascading rows of data on the display. He realizes this is not a theoretical student project. It is a functional diagnostic weapon. The defense concludes without a single dissenting question from the board. The panel convenes for less than 3 minutes before delivering their verdict. They award me the highest departmental honors available. The academic triumph is undeniable and earned through years of sleep deprivation and relentless focus. I pack my laptop into my canvas bag. The heavy wooden doors of the lecture hall close behind me. I step out into the long corridor of the analytics building. The hallway is deserted. The fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting sterile shadows on the linoleum floor. The contrast between my professional victory and my personal reality is stark. I reach into the pocket of my blazer and pull out my phone. The screen displays the current time and a blank notification center. There are no missed calls. There are no text messages wishing me luck or asking about the results of the presentation. I emailed Thomas and Diane the schedule for this defense 6 weeks ago. I sent a calendar reminder last Sunday. The silence radiating from the St. Louis suburbs is a finalized data point. They chose to ignore the culmination of my grueling academic journey. I stand alone in the quiet corridor absorbing the isolation. I do not feel sorrow. Sorrow requires the expectation of a different outcome, and I stopped expecting their support the day my tuition vanished. I begin walking toward the campus bus stop. The heavy canvas bag digs into my shoulder. My phone vibrates in my hand. The caller identification displays the name of my father. I answer the call, expecting a late acknowledgement. I assume Thomas is calling to ask how the panel responded to my research. I say hello. He does not ask about the defense. He does not offer a greeting. His voice is tight and rushed, carrying a manufactured urgency. Selena. I need you to drive back to St. Louis right now, he commands. I stop walking. I process the parameters of the demand. Columbia is a 2-hour drive from his location. I ask him why he needs me to travel across the state on a Thursday evening. Thomas exhales sharply, acting as if my question is a profound inconvenience to his schedule. Brandon is hosting his tasting event at the brewery tomorrow night, he says. His inventory spreadsheets are a mess. The formatting is broken, and he cannot present amateur documents to potential distributors. He is exhausted from the entrepreneurial grind all week. You are good with data. I told him you would come clean up the files and make the projections look professional. The audacity of the request hangs in the humid air. Thomas is demanding I perform uncompensated clerical work for a failing business. He wants me to spend the evening of my greatest academic achievement fixing the sloppy mistakes of my older brother. Brandon is 26 years old and claims to be the chief executive officer of an artisanal brand, yet he cannot format a basic spreadsheet. He possesses no actual product to distribute, but he requires flawless documentation to maintain his aesthetic deception. Thomas expects me to act as the invisible assistant to a man who funded his vanity with my stolen future. The familiar pressure to comply attempts to surface, but the armor I built in that vibrating apartment holds firm. The logic pathways in my brain assess the interaction. I draw my first hard boundary. I tell my father no. The word is a complete sentence. Thomas goes quiet. The shock of my refusal renders him momentarily speechless. He has never heard me deny a direct order regarding the golden child. He demands to know what I mean. I keep my voice perfectly level. I tell him I just defended my thesis 10 minutes ago. I remind him I have a warehouse shift at 4 in the morning. I state clearly that if Brandon wants to run a business, he needs to manage his own inventory. I hear the phone change hands. The deep voice of Thomas is replaced by the sharp and calculated tone of my mother. Diane does not bother with a transition. She slices straight into the conversation with a weaponized guilt trip. "Selena Murphy, what has gotten into you?" she demands. Her voice drips with artificial disappointment. "Your brother is on the verge of securing distribution partnerships that will change the trajectory of this family. Your father and I have sacrificed our retirement savings to keep his dream alive. The least you can do is organize a few simple documents." I look at the concrete sidewalk beneath my feet. I tell her I am not being selfish. I explain that I am drawing a boundary and I need to sleep before my shift. Diane adopts her cold matriarchal cadence. She attempts to shame me into submission. "Family helps family," she hisses over the speaker. "We are supposed to be a team. If you cannot support your own brother when he needs you the most, then you are making a very clear statement about where your loyalties lie." She lets the silence stretch before delivering the ultimate threat. "Do not expect us to drop everything to attend your commencement ceremony next week if you refuse to contribute to the actual success of this family," she states. The words are designed to shatter my resolve. Diane expects the threat of an empty audience to force my immediate compliance. She assumes my desire for their presence outweighs my need for self-respect. She believes I will trade my dignity for a photograph of us smiling outside the stadium. She miscalculates the data. The threat does not break me. It solidifies my perspective. I realize that attending my graduation is not an act of parental pride to them. It is a bargaining chip. It is a transaction they are willing to cancel if I do not provide free labor for their favorite investment. I accept the terms of the transaction. I tell her I understand the variables perfectly. I tell her to have a good time at the tasting event. I disconnect the call before she can respond. I slide the phone back into the pocket of my blazer. The fracture is officially set in stone. The Nelson family dynamic is no longer an emotional burden I have to navigate. It is a closed loop. They made their choice, and I log the betrayal like a permanent record in a sterile database. I resume my walk to the bus stop. The evening air feels slightly lighter. The manipulation tactic failed. The true cost of my freedom is the permanent absence of my parents, and I am entirely prepared to pay it. The timeline snaps back to the present moment. I am sitting on the baking metal hood of my used sedan in the university parking lot. The sweltering Columbia heat radiates through the soles of my shoes. A week ago, standing in a silent university corridor, I listened to Diane issue a direct threat over the phone. She promised to withhold her presence if I refused to act as unpaid labor for my brother. Today, that threat has materialized into a physical reality. The empty folding chairs inside the arena are no longer a manipulation tactic hanging in the future. They are a finalized data point. I sat in my designated row on the athletic field and stared at Section 3, Row 12. The surrounding bleachers were a vibrant blur of cheering families and waving parents. My two reserved seats remained folded. They formed a stark visual void in a stadium overflowing with human connection. When the dean called my name and I walked across the wooden stage, I looked at those empty chairs one final time. I recorded the deficit in my mental ledger. The equation is closed. I look down at the cell phone resting in my lap. I navigate away from the text message Diane sent me 10 minutes before the ceremony. The word pointless stares back at me from the screen before I swipe the application away. I open a social media platform. I do not search for the profile of my brother. Brandon rarely posts his own content anymore. He outsources the curation of his image to his fiancée. Her name is Jessica. Jessica is a 24-year-old digital lifestyle curator. She moved into the luxury loft Brandon leases downtown 6 months ago. She brought a professional ring light and an inflated sense of self-importance. She does not possess a business degree. She has no understanding of supply chain logistics or wholesale distribution. Her primary skill set involves translating the hollow buzzwords Brandon uses into a glamorous online aesthetic. She understands lighting angles and follower metrics and engagement algorithms. She is the perfect symbiotic partner for a man running a fraudulent enterprise. She validates his delusion by treating his empty empire as a tangible reality. She provides the visual proof that Thomas and Diane desperately need to justify their financial sacrifices. I tap on the circular profile icon of Jessica. The screen loads a sequence of newly uploaded video clips. The audio begins to play. It is a loud, generic electronic track chosen to simulate the energy of a crowded venue. The first video displays the interior of the artisanal brewery in St. Louis. The camera pans across the reclaimed wood tables and the copper bar top. The exposed Edison bulbs cast a warm, cinematic glow over the room. The second video clip stops the breath in my lungs. Thomas and Diane stand in the center of the frame, flanking Brandon. My father wears a crisp linen blazer. My mother wears a silk designer dress. They are beaming with practiced smiles. They raise expensive crystal flutes of champagne in a synchronized toast. Brandon stands between them, holding a glass of pale ale, looking like a conquering hero. Jessica types a caption across the bottom of the video frame, celebrating the next big beverage brand with the ultimate support system. I watch the clip loop 3 times. I do not feel the familiar ache of abandonment. I apply the same analytical scrutiny I use for corporate financial disclosures. I look past the smiling faces and the expensive champagne to analyze the background variables. The venue is a sprawling brick warehouse designed to accommodate a capacity of 200 patrons. I pause the video and count the figures lingering in the background of the shot. There are perhaps 14 individuals present. I resume the playback and study the catering tables lined up against the far wall. The silver platters of imported prosciutto and artisanal flatbreads sit entirely untouched. The local distributors and elite industry buyers Brandon claimed to be courting are nowhere to be found. The attendees wandering through the background consist entirely of hired event staff and a few casual acquaintances. The math resolves with crystal clarity. My parents funded a luxury illusion. They paid for a premium venue and high-end catering and professional lighting to stage a networking event for an audience of zero. They skipped the genuine earned academic triumph of their daughter to serve as background extras in a digital performance. They chose to drink champagne in an empty warehouse to validate a business that generates no revenue. The word pointless echoes in my mind. It was the specific vocabulary Diane deployed to diminish my master degree. She told me the graduation was a pointless ceremony in the grand scheme. Sitting on the hood of my car, staring at the digital proof of their financial hallucination, the word loses all its power. The sting evaporates. The pain of their rejection solidifies into a thick, impenetrable armor. I realize they are projecting their own reality onto me. My degree is a verified asset. Their investment is a terminal liability. I slide off the warm metal hood of the sedan. My feet hit the asphalt. I reach up and pull the zipper of my black synthetic graduation gown. I let the heavy fabric fall open, allowing the humid breeze to cool my skin. The physical action feels like shedding a weighted blanket. For 24 years, I carried the burden of their expectations. I tried to earn a seat at a dining table that was built to exclude me. I tried to prove my worth to people who viewed my intellect as a threat to their favorite son. I accept the cold truth that I will never be enough for them because their capacity for love is tied exclusively to the ego of Brandon. I open the passenger door of my car. I toss the padded leather diploma folder onto the seat. I make a silent and binding vow to myself. I will never ask Thomas or Diane for anything ever again. I will never ask for their validation. I will never seek their approval. I will never try to convince them of my value. I am officially removing myself from their portfolio. They made their choice, and I am leaving them to the consequences of their investment. I walk around to the driver's side. I open the door and sit behind the steering wheel. The interior of the sedan is baking like an oven. I roll down the windows to let the trapped heat escape. I slide the key into the ignition. I am preparing to drive away from Columbia and out of their lives forever. I have no job lined up. I have a negative bank balance. I have nothing but a predictive algorithm saved on a hard drive, and a mind forged by years of surviving their neglect. I am ready to face the world on my own terms. Just as my fingers turn the key, the cell phone resting in my lap vibrates. The sudden buzzing startles me in the quiet cabin of the car. I look down at the illuminated screen. It is not an automated alert from a social media application. It is an incoming call. The caller identification does not display a familiar name. An unknown number flashes on the glass. The area code indicates the call is originating from the corporate district of St. Louis. I stare at the vibrating device. I do not know it yet, but the voice waiting on the other end of the line belongs to a man who holds the power to rewrite my entire financial destiny. The countdown to my reversal of fortune has reached 0. I clear my throat, wipe the sweat from my forehead, and swipe the screen to answer the call. I hold the phone to my ear. The air conditioning in my used sedan struggles to push cold air through the vents. I say a brief hello. The voice on the other end does not belong to a telemarketer or a university administrator. It is a deep, measured baritone that carries the undeniable weight of authority. The caller identifies himself as Elias Croft. The name registers instantly in my analytical mind. Elias Croft is not a local celebrity or a social media influencer. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Croft Enterprises. His conglomerate commands a $15 billion footprint across the Midwestern logistics and supply chain sector. He controls fleets of freight trucks, shipping hubs, and international distribution networks. He is the apex predator of the exact industry where I spent the last 3 years lifting crates on a concrete loading dock. Elias does not offer warm congratulations on my graduation. He does not ask how my day is going. He bypasses social pleasantries entirely and speaks in raw metrics. Miss Murphy, he says, the lead professor of your thesis panel is a former consultant for my acquisition department. He forwarded your executable algorithm to my senior analysts on Thursday evening. I sit perfectly still in the driver's seat. The heat of the parking lot fades into the background. I listen as Elias outlines the sequence of events that occurred while I was being threatened by my mother over the phone. My team spent 72 straight hours attempting to break your logic framework, Elias continues. His tone is stripped of any corporate fluff. They fed it dummy data and historical market crashes. They pushed the parameters to the breaking point. The code held. We then ran your model against our internal database of active investments. Your software identified 6 terminal companies currently sitting in our portfolio. He pauses, allowing the weight of that statement to land. My algorithm did not just analyze theoretical startups. It audited a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate. Those 6 companies were projecting positive quarterly earnings, Elias says. Our human auditors missed the internal margin deviations. Your software stripped away the public relations narratives and flagged the hidden supply chain rot. It identified the exact velocity of their cash burn. We initiated emergency audits this morning based on your data. You were correct on all 6 counts. You saved my firm tens of millions of dollars in projected losses. I look out through the windshield at the empty university stadium. 5 minutes ago, my parents declared my degree a pointless piece of paper. Now a titan of industry is validating my intellect with empirical proof. I do not boast. I do not express shock. I match his clinical cadence. I tell him the math never lies. Elias lets out a short, sharp sound of approval. I do not want to purchase a license for this software, he states. Licensing allows my competitors to eventually reverse engineer the logic. I want exclusive ownership of the asset, and I require the architect who built it. I am launching a new division specifically designed to identify distressed supply chains before they hit the open market. I am offering you the position of Director of Operations Optimization, effective immediately. The offer hangs in this cool air of my car interior. He is not offering an entry-level cubicle position. He is handing me an executive title. You will report directly to me, Elias adds. Your initial departmental operating budget is $5 million. Your base salary is high 6 figures, plus a performance percentage of the failing assets you successfully identify and liquidate for my firm. I want you in my downtown St. Louis headquarters on Monday morning at 8 o'clock. The transition from a discarded daughter to a corporate strategist requires no emotional deliberation. I do not ask for time to think about it. I do not need to consult my family. I look at the padded leather diploma folder resting on my passenger seat. I pick up the phone and tell Elias Croft I will see him on Monday. I end the call. The engine of my sedan idles. I shift the car into drive and pull out of the sweltering asphalt lot. I leave Columbia behind and head east toward St. Louis. I am not driving back to format inventory spreadsheets for a failing brewery. I am driving back to claim an empire. The momentum of the following week accelerates with terrifying precision. I report to the glass and steel skyscraper of Croft Enterprises on Monday morning. I sign a contract dense with legal terminology and non-disclosure agreements. The ink on the heavy paper solidifies my new reality. I am handed a corporate access badge and escorted to a corner office on the 34th floor. The space features panoramic windows overlooking the Mississippi River. The desk is a single slab of polished walnut. I systematically erase my old life. I process my final resignation at the regional warehouse, handing in my steel-toed boots and safety vest. I terminate the lease on my vibrating apartment above the commercial laundry facility. I secure a luxury high-rise condominium in the center of the downtown financial district. The hum of industrial washing machines is replaced by the insulated quiet of centralized climate control. I purchase tailored blazers and silk blouses, shedding the uniform of the working class. I do not rest on the comfort of my new salary. I assemble a team of junior data scientists. We integrate my algorithm into the global mainframe of Croft Enterprises. We begin a ruthless campaign of asset optimization. We scan the regional market for over-leveraged logistics companies. We identify firms funneling seed money to cover operational debt and flag the exact moment their burn rate outpaces their runway. We acquire valuable intellectual property for pennies on the dollar during quiet bankruptcy proceedings. My department becomes the most efficient and lethal instrument in the entire conglomerate. I operate within a 10-block radius of the artisanal brewery where Brandon plays the role of a visionary founder. While he posts filtered photographs of empty bar stools and complains about the stress of entrepreneurship, I am actively liquidating companies 10 times his size. We share the same city, but we inhabit entirely different stratospheres of reality. I maintain my absolute silence. I do not update my social media profiles. I do not send a text message to Thomas or Diane bragging about my corner office. I understand the strategic value of stealth. My rapid corporate ascent, however, does not go unnoticed by the industry. When a 24-year-old woman assumes control of a $5 million acquisition budget at a major conglomerate, the financial sector pays attention. 6 weeks after I sign my contract, a prominent business journalist requests an exclusive interview. Elias Croft approves the media engagement, recognizing the strategic advantage of projecting technological dominance to his competitors. The journalist spends 2 days shadowing my department. He observes the flawless execution of the algorithm. He notes my clinical detachment and my refusal to factor human emotion into financial risk assessment. A professional photographer captures an image of me standing in my corner office with my arms crossed, staring directly into the camera lens with cold authority. The feature article drops on a Tuesday morning. It is published in a premier regional business journal that lands on the desks of every major executive investor and wealthy suburbanite in Missouri. The headline is printed in bold black lettering. The Oracle of Insolvency: How a Data Prodigy is Rewriting the Playbook at Croft Enterprises. The article details the architecture of my thesis algorithm and praises its ruthless efficiency in identifying terminal corporate decay. It highlights my high-level compensation package and my direct reporting line to Elias Croft. I sit at my walnut desk and open the digital analytics dashboard provided by the Public Relations Department. A heat map displays the online engagement metrics for the article in real time. I watch the data points multiply and spread across the screen. The news breaches the downtown financial district by noon. It trends across corporate networking platforms by early afternoon. I track the geographic spread as the article moves steadily westward along the highway corridors. The red glow of the heat map creeps closer and closer to the affluent suburbs where Thomas and Diane reside. The collision is no longer a theoretical possibility. It is a mathematical certainty. The insulated bubble my parents constructed to protect the fragile ego of Brandon is about to shatter against the undeniable proof of my success. I lean back in my ergonomic chair and take a slow sip of water. I initiate a silent internal timer. I know exactly what will happen when they realize the daughter they discarded possesses the capital they desperately crave. The countdown has started, and the trap is waiting to be sprung. I sit in my corner office on the 34th floor overlooking the Mississippi River. The digital analytics dashboard glows on my secondary monitor. The Public Relations Department of Croft Enterprises provided me with real-time tracking software to monitor the digital footprint of my feature interview. The article is titled, The Oracle of Insolvency. I watch the heat map display the online engagement metrics. The visual representation of data is fascinating. The clusters of activity begin in the downtown financial sector, where analysts and logistics executives share the link across professional networks. Then the geographic data points begin to shift. The engagement tracks westward along the highway corridors, moving steadily away from the city center. I watch the red pixels bleed into the affluent western suburbs. They cross the boundary into Chesterfield and Ladue. This is the exact zip code where Thomas and Diane reside. It is a neighborhood defined by manicured lawns and country club memberships and the relentless pursuit of social status. I initiate a digital stopwatch application on my screen. I want to measure the exact duration required for my family to process the cognitive dissonance of my sudden wealth. My parents have spent years carefully curating a narrative where Brandon is the brilliant entrepreneur and I am the struggling, invisible worker. They now have to reconcile their established fiction with the tangible reality of my $5 million operating budget. They have to figure out how to approach a person they systematically discarded now that she possesses a resource they covet. The silent timer runs for exactly 48 hours. During those 2 days, I do not deviate from my corporate responsibilities. I authorize the hostile acquisition of a failing regional freight carrier. I restructure a distressed supply chain for a manufacturing client. I exist purely in the realm of raw data and strategic execution. Back in the suburbs, my parents are living in a very uncomfortable space. They are likely fielding phone calls and emails from their affluent neighbors who subscribe to the premier business journal. They are forced to smile and pretend they are proud of a daughter they ignored. They are trapped by their own need to maintain appearances in front of their social circle. At exactly 2:14 on Thursday afternoon, my personal cell phone illuminates on my polished walnut desk. The screen displays an incoming text message from Diane. I do not pick up the device immediately. I let it sit there while I finish typing a directive to Elias Croft regarding a pending liquidation strategy in Kansas City. I operate on my own schedule now. Only after I hit send do I reach for the phone and open the message. I study the specific arrangement of her words. I analyze her syntax the exact same way I analyze a fraudulent corporate earnings report. The text is a masterpiece of historical revisionism. It contains zero apologies for her previous behavior. It offers no acknowledgement of the graduation ceremony she skipped or the free labor she aggressively demanded. The message reads that they are so proud of their genius girl. She writes that they always knew I was a star. She claims they have been bragging about my corporate position to everyone at the golf course. She ends the message by demanding I call them tonight so we can properly celebrate my new job. The phrase "always knew" is a particularly tactical choice of vocabulary. Diane is attempting to retroactively claim ownership of a success she explicitly refused to support. She is trying to rewrite the past to secure a comfortable and profitable position in my present. In the past, receiving a message like that would have triggered a desperate and hopeful response. The younger version of me craved the illusion of a supportive family. I would have typed a rapid reply feeling grateful for any microscopic crumb of parental approval. I would have ignored the hypocrisy just to feel included. That version of me died on the baking asphalt of the university parking lot. I activate the read receipt function on my messaging application. I open her text, allowing the software to notify her that I have viewed her words. I do not type a single character in response. I lock the screen and place the phone back on the desk. Leaving a master manipulator on red is a calculated risk. It disrupts their primary control mechanism. It removes their oxygen. Individuals like Diane expect compliance or gratitude or even anger. They use emotional reactions as fuel to steer the narrative and maintain their dominance. They do not know how to process pure indifference. Silence is a boundary they cannot manipulate. It forces them to sit with their own lack of control. I know my refusal to respond will force an escalation. I anticipate their next maneuver with mathematical certainty. The escalation requires exactly 4 hours to materialize. Diane cannot tolerate the rigid boundary of my unresponsiveness. She outsources the conflict to my father. Thomas serves as her designated enforcer whenever her artificial sweetness fails to produce immediate compliance. At 6:30 in the evening, my phone rings. The caller identification shows Thomas Murphy. I let the ringtone cycle 3 full times before answering. I press the phone to my ear but remain entirely silent, forcing him to speak first. He says my name. His voice lacks the warm and congratulatory tone my mother projected in her text message. His cadence is tight. He speaks with a manufactured urgency that attempts to mask an underlying current of anxiety. I reply with a sterile and professional greeting. He demands to know why I am ignoring my mother. He claims she sent me a beautiful message earlier today and she is very hurt by my cold silence. I state simply that I am working and my time is valuable. Thomas exhales sharply over the receiver. The sound is designed to signal his impatience and re-establish his patriarchal authority. He tells me we need to talk. He says we need to have a mandatory family meeting tomorrow evening. The phrase family meeting carries a heavy historical precedent in the Murphy household. Family meetings were never convened to celebrate achievements. They were never scheduled to share joyful news or offer support. Family meetings were strategic operations designed to extract resources or demand strict compliance to the agenda of Brandon. I ask him what the meeting is about. He dodges the direct question. He replies that they just need to coordinate some important family matters. He mentions that Brandon and Jessica are going to be there. He says Diane is making a nice dinner, and they have a lot of moving parts right now, so they need everyone at the table. He instructs me to drive to their suburban estate by 7 o'clock tomorrow night. Thomas attempts to frame the demand as a casual dinner invitation, but the underlying tension in his voice betrays his panic. My predictive brain activates. I run the available data points through a mental algorithm to determine their true objective. Variable 1 is the tasting event Brandon hosted last week. He staged a lavish and expensive networking event that yielded 0 tangible distribution contracts for a brewery that produces no actual beer. Variable 2 is the financial history of my parents. Thomas and Diane possess a documented track record of liquidating their own assets to cover the escalating deficits of my brother. Variable 3 is the current economic climate in downtown St. Louis. The market indicates rising commercial lease rates, placing severe pressure on business owners who carry high overhead with 0 revenue. Variable 4 is the Business Journal article. A premier publication just broadcasted my substantial executive salary and my operational budget to the entire state of Missouri. The math resolves into a singular and undeniable conclusion. Thomas and Diane are not calling to congratulate me on my new executive title. They are calling to access my bank accounts. They are attempting to lure me into a familiar environment where they hold the home court advantage. They plan to use the physical setting of my childhood home combined with the presence of Brandon and Jessica to apply psychological pressure. This is not a celebration of my success. It is a collection call to fund their failure. They believe they can trap me in a rehearsed guilt trip and extract a financial bailout for whatever disaster Brandon has recently engineered. I tell my father I will be there. I tell him I will see them tomorrow at 7. Thomas sounds visibly relieved and terminates the connection. He thinks he has successfully manipulated the board. He assumes I am walking blindly into their ambush as the obedient subordinate daughter they have always known. He does not realize the fundamental rules of engagement have changed. I am no longer the defenseless warehouse worker seeking their validation. I am a director of operations optimization who specializes in dismantling hostile corporate environments. I open my secure contact directory to prepare my countermeasure. I need to uncover the exact architecture of their ruin before I sit down at their mahogany table. Walking into a negotiation without forensic data is a fundamental error. I do not intend to walk into the suburban estate of my parents armed only with suspicion and intuition. I require verified documentation. I close my contact directory and open the internal executive network of Croft Enterprises. I scroll past the public relations managers and the junior analysts. I stop on the name Marcus. Marcus is a senior forensic wealth manager operating on the 38th floor of the conglomerate. He does not build investment portfolios for clients. He dismantles them. He spends his days tracking hidden liabilities and exposing corporate fraud for our acquisition division. He is 34 years old and views human emotion as a variable that clutters clean data. He is the most objective observer in the entire building. I secure his services through an expedited internal request. I walk up 4 flights of stairs to his office. I close his glass door. I place a single sheet of printer paper directly in front of his keyboard. The paper contains 4 lines of text. It lists the legal names of my father and my mother and my brother. The final line displays the registered entity name of the artisanal brewery. Marcus picks up the paper. He does not ask about my biological relation to the targets. He treats every request as a standard vulnerability assessment. I tell Marcus I need a comprehensive extraction of their public financial footprint. I specify that I require property records and civil court filings and corporate debt structures. I need the data compiled and verified before 5 o'clock this evening. Marcus nods once. He sets the paper down and turns his attention to his dual monitors. I return to my office and spend the day executing my standard duties. I compartmentalize the impending confrontation. I just need Marcus to hand me the blueprint of their snare. At 4:15 in the afternoon, my office door opens. Marcus steps inside, holding a thin gray folder. He does not sit on the leather sofa. He stands in front of my walnut desk with a rigid posture. He looks at ruined balance sheets every single day, but something in this specific file disturbs his professional sensibilities. He places the gray folder on my desk and opens the cover. He does not offer a gentle preamble. He speaks in rapid and clinical facts. He begins by detailing the corporate structure of the brewery. Brandon registered the brewing concept as a limited liability corporation to shield his personal assets. Marcus explains that this strategy only functions if the founder actually possesses personal assets. Brandon holds zero equity in any functional market. He generated zero revenue. He secured no institutional backing. Marcus turns to the second page and traces a printed graph with his index finger. The graph details a catastrophic cash flow bleed. Brandon hired a boutique public relations firm to market his tasting events. He signed a commercial lease for a brick warehouse in the historic district without finalizing the permits required for fermentation. He leased a luxury SUV under the corporate tax identification number. He drained the initial seed capital in less than 4 months. When his bank accounts hit zero, traditional lenders refused to issue him a standard line of credit. He possessed no functional brewing equipment and no collateral. Marcus turns to the third page. He explains that Brandon approached a commercial lender specializing in high-risk debt instruments. The firm operates in the shadow sector of corporate finance, issuing predatory bridge loans to desperate founders who cannot pass regulatory underwriting. The lender agreed to float Brandon a capital injection to keep the aesthetic of the brewery alive. They demanded tangible real estate collateral to secure the note. Brandon owned no real estate. He went to Thomas and Diane. Marcus slides a photocopied legal document across my desk. It is a commercial loan agreement. I look at the bottom of the page. I see the looping cursive signature of my mother. I see the sharp block lettering of my father. 6 months ago, my parents signed as the primary guarantors on a commercial debt instrument. They used the deed to their pristine suburban estate as collateral. They subordinated their original mortgage to fund the illusion of their favorite son. I look at the principal amount printed at the top of the loan agreement. The number contains 5 zeros. The total debt is $750,000. The air in my office grows thin. I process the magnitude of that specific figure. Years ago, they drained my $45,000 tuition fund and told me to figure it out on my own. I spent years surviving on stale protein bars and working dawn shifts to fund my existence. Now I hold a document proving they leveraged the roof over their heads to hand Brandon $750,000 for a business that generates no product. The inequity is a structural failure of human decency. Marcus does not let me linger on the shock. He taps the final page in the gray folder. He warns me the situation is critical. The predatory lender structured the loan with a variable interest rate and a punitive balloon payment. Brandon exhausted the funds in less than a fiscal quarter. He missed his first scheduled repayment. Then he missed the second. Marcus points to a harsh black stamp on the final document. The stamp reads, Notice of Default. Marcus states this notice was filed in the civil court system exactly 14 days ago. The lender initiated pre-foreclosure proceedings on the suburban estate. My parents are currently in breach of contract. The lender gave them a standard cure period. They have exactly 30 days to produce the outstanding arrears and penalty fees. If they fail to secure the cash, the bank seizes the asset. The house goes to public auction and they lose everything. The data points connect in my mind with blinding speed. The entire timeline snaps into perfect logical focus. 14 days ago, the notice of default arrived in their mailbox. They spent 2 weeks drowning in silent panic, realizing the golden child was a financial sinkhole. They faced the total destruction of their social status and their shelter. They had no income streams capable of servicing a predatory loan of that magnitude. Then 2 days ago, the premier business journal published my photograph. The financial sector broadcasted my new position as the Director of Operations Optimization. The article detailed my substantial compensation package and my $5 million budget. Diane did not send that sweet text message because she missed her daughter. Thomas did not schedule a mandatory family dinner to celebrate my corporate ascent. They saw a lifeline. They calculated that my executive salary could cover the defaulted payments. They assume the quiet and practical daughter, who always survived in the shadows, will simply hand over her earnings to save the family estate out of misplaced biological loyalty. They intend to use the emotional pressure of a family dinner to corner me into acting as their personal bailout fund. I close the gray folder and rest my hands flat on the walnut surface of my desk. I finally understand the rules of their game, and I hold the winning hand. I look up at Marcus. I ask him what his schedule looks like for tomorrow evening. He checks his watch and replies that his schedule is clear. I slide the gray folder back toward him. I instruct him to print certified and notarized copies of every single document in the file. I tell him to print the deed transfers and the loan origination signatures and the notice of default. I require him to place them in a sterile manila envelope. I inform Marcus he is coming with me to the suburbs. I am attending their family meeting, but I require an objective witness. I require a forensic expert to verify the math when they inevitably try to lie to my face. The ambush is set, but they are inviting a corporate liquidator into their home. The numerical reality of the debt settles over me in the quiet isolation of my corporate office. I sit at my walnut desk and process the data provided by Marcus. My parents leveraged the physical roof over their heads to fund an illusion. They subordinated their pristine suburban mortgage to hand Brandon $750,000. Now they expect my new executive salary to cover the deficit they created. The sadness a normal daughter might expect to feel never arrives. It is replaced by a chilling clarity. The extortion attempt is transparent. I turn back to Marcus and deliver my final instructions for the evening. I require him to print certified copies of every single financial document in his digital file. I instruct him to include the deed transfers and the loan origination signatures and the notice of default. I tell him to ensure every page is notarized. I request his presence at the family dinner tonight as an objective forensic witness. The Federal Business Week concludes. I leave the glass and steel architecture of downtown St. Louis and drive west toward the affluent suburbs. Marcus sits in the passenger seat of my vehicle, holding a sterile manila envelope on his lap. We merge onto the highway, heading toward Chesterfield. This specific geographic area is engineered to project success. The neighborhoods are defined by sprawling estates and manicured lawns and private country club memberships. People in this zip code measure human worth by square footage and luxury vehicle leases. It is an environment where perception holds more value than actual equity. Thomas and Diane spent decades curating their image to fit this exact demographic. They worshipped the aesthetic of wealth. We exit the highway and navigate the winding residential streets. I pull into the circular driveway of my childhood home. I put the car in park and study the exterior of the property. The rot of a failing supply chain always reveals itself on the surface eventually. The landscaping is normally maintained by a professional crew, but today it shows subtle signs of decay. The front lawn features dry yellow patches. The pristine white paint on the wooden trim is peeling near the gutters. A dark water stain mars the stucco above the garage door. The physical structure looks exhausted. It resembles a corporate asset carrying a debt it can no longer support. The financial rot inside the ledger is manifesting on the exterior walls. We walk up the cracked concrete path leading to the front door. I ring the brass doorbell. The familiar chime echoes inside the foyer. The heavy oak door swings open. Diane stands in the threshold. She wears a cashmere cardigan and her signature pearl earrings. She paints a wide and welcoming smile across her face. She is preparing to greet the compliant and invisible daughter she summoned to the slaughter. She speaks my name with a rehearsed musical cadence. Then her eyes shift. Her gaze lands on Marcus standing one step behind me. The artificial smile falters. The muscles in her jaw tighten. The welcoming matriarch routine vanishes instantly. It is replaced by the sharp calculation of a cornered animal. She looks at the tailored charcoal suit Marcus wears. She looks at his rigid professional posture. She stares at the thick manila envelope resting in his hand. Diane scrambles to process the intrusion. The presence of an unknown variable disrupts her carefully planned ambush. Her voice drops its musical tone. She asks me who my guest is. Her tone is suspicious and guarded. I keep my voice calm and even. I introduce Marcus as a colleague from Croft Enterprises. I state that we had business meetings in the area this afternoon and I invited him to join us for dinner. Marcus extends his hand. Diane hesitates for a fraction of a second before shaking it. Marcus introduces himself with a tone devoid of any warmth. He treats the interaction like a corporate audit. Diane steps aside to let us enter the house. She cannot deny a guest entry without violating the strict rules of suburban decorum she idolizes. She is trapped by her own social programming. We step into the foyer. The interior of the house smells of synthetic pine air freshener, masking a deep underlying scent of anxiety. I analyze the environment and notice subtle changes to the decor. The antique silver mirror that used to hang above the entryway console table is missing. A cheap generic painting hangs in its place. The Persian runner rug in the hallway looks worn and frayed at the edges. The financial bleed is leaving physical scars on the interior of the home. They are quietly liquidating their possessions to maintain the illusion of solvency. Diane guides us into the formal dining room. The mahogany table is set for 4 people. She scrambles to pull a spare folding chair from the hall closet to accommodate Marcus. Thomas sits at the head of the table. He pours himself a glass of red wine. I look at the label on the bottle. It is a cheap blend from a local grocery store. Growing up, my father historically only consumed expensive imported vintages to project his refined palate. The downgrade in his beverage choice is a glaring admission of his insolvency. Thomas looks older. Deep creases frame his mouth. He offers a strained, tight smile when I walk into the room. He does not stand up to hug me. His eyes dart to Marcus, mirroring the panic of my mother. Brandon occupies the seat to the right of my father. He wears a crisp designer button-down shirt, but the collar looks tight around his neck. A thin sheen of perspiration coats his forehead. He taps his fingers rhythmically against his wine glass. The confident and charismatic entrepreneur persona looks frayed around the edges. He is sweating. He knows his fraudulent empire is crumbling, and he knows he needs my executive salary to prop it up. Jessica sits next to him. She is scrolling through her mobile phone, entirely detached from the underlying tension in the room. She wears an expensive silk blouse and a diamond tennis bracelet. She does not bother to look up when I pull out my chair. She mutters a brief greeting and returns to her screen. She genuinely believes the lies Brandon tells her. She thinks she is sitting next to a future industry titan, experiencing a minor cash flow delay. She has no idea she is engaged to a man who drained the retirement accounts of his parents to buy her that jewelry. She is an unwitting participant in a financial tragedy. She does not know she is sitting inside a foreclosed asset. Diane walks into the kitchen and returns with the dinner. In the past, she prided herself on hosting lavish and catered dinner parties. She loved presenting elaborate multi-course meals to impress her country club friends. Tonight, she places a ceramic dish of baked pasta in the center of the mahogany table. A plastic container of pre-washed salad greens sits next to it. For dessert, a store-bought pie rests on the sideboard, still in its original aluminum tin. The austerity of the meal is the final piece of evidence. They cannot afford to cater their own extortion attempt. I take my seat and play the role of the quiet observer. Marcus sits to my left, placing the manila envelope face down on the table next to his silverware. He eats his dry pasta in total silence. His presence unnerves my family. They keep glancing at his tailored suit and the sterile envelope resting near his hand. They do not know how to factor him into their rehearsed script. He is an immovable object in a room built on fragile illusions. The silence in the dining room stretches until it becomes uncomfortable. No one speaks about the graduation ceremony they missed. No one apologizes for the years of neglect. They offer fake compliments and serve cheap wine, waiting for the right moment to pivot the conversation. I drink a sip of water and place my glass down on the table. I let them dig their graves a few feet deeper. I watch them circle the trap. The jaws are open and they are preparing to step directly into the teeth. The dinner concludes with the scraped sounds of silverware against ceramic plates. The dry pasta is consumed. The store-bought pie sits untouched on the wooden sideboard. Diane gathers the dishes with stiff and jerky movements. The air in the room feels thick and heavy. Thomas clears his throat. The sound is a deliberate signal to transition the evening from a strained meal into a strategic operation. He shifts his posture, sitting up straighter in his chair at the head of the mahogany table. He initiates the passive-aggressive pleasantries designed to set the hierarchy of the room. He looks at me and offers a patronizing smile. He says he saw the business article online. He mentions that it sounds like I am keeping busy up in the city. He calls my position at Croft Enterprises a nice computer job that pays the rent. I look at my father across the table. I manage a $5 million corporate acquisition budget. I predict the collapse of multi-million-dollar logistics firms. A premier business journal profiled my intellect and broadcasted my executive salary to the entire state of Missouri. Yet sitting in his dining room, he still tries to shrink my reality to fit his narrative. He needs to diminish my success to justify asking for my capital. He cannot beg a powerful executive for a bailout, so he pretends he is asking a subordinate daughter for a favor. Defending myself would signal that his opinion still holds value. I do not correct him. I do not list my compensation package or explain the complexity of my supply chain algorithm. I pick up my water glass. I take a slow sip. I agree quietly, keeping my expression entirely sterile. I tell him it pays the rent. My voice is a flat baseline, offering him zero emotional friction. Marcus sits to my left, functioning as a silent witness to their delusion. He does not touch his water. He merely observes the interpersonal mechanics of a family preparing to commit extortion. Brandon occupies the seat to the right of my father. He is struggling to maintain his composure. The charismatic facade of the visionary founder is cracking under the weight of his hidden debt. He is sweating through his designer linen shirt. The fabric clings to his shoulders. He taps his fingers rhythmically against the stem of his wineglass. He is a terrified child waiting for the bank to lock the doors of his empty warehouse. He glances at Marcus, trying to calculate if this stranger will interfere with their financial request. Jessica sits beside Brandon. She represents a glaring variable in their equation. She is entirely detached from the suffocating tension in the room. She taps the screen of her mobile phone, uploading curated content to her digital followers. She believes she is marrying a successful entrepreneur, experiencing a routine growth phase. She does not know the brewery generates zero revenue. She does not know her future father-in-law subordinated the mortgage on this pristine suburban estate to fund her lifestyle. She is an audience member watching a play, entirely unaware that the theater is actively on fire. Her presence forces Thomas and Diane to speak in codes. They cannot state their bankruptcy out loud without shattering the illusion they sold to her. Thomas folds his hands on the table. He locks his eyes onto mine, projecting an intense artificial warmth. He shifts his tone, adopting the grave, measured cadence he uses when he believes he is delivering profound wisdom. He shifts into his formal negotiation voice. "Selena," he begins, "your mother and I have been discussing the current economic landscape. The commercial real estate market is experiencing a severe correction. It is a challenging environment for early-stage innovators. He pauses to let the gravity of his statement settle over the table. He looks at Brandon with an expression of manufactured sympathy. He delivers a staggering sequence of euphemisms to mask their impending ruin. The artisanal brewing venture is encountering some temporary market headwinds, Thomas explains. The core concept is solid, the branding is revolutionary, but the broader market downturn has disrupted his timeline for securing institutional distribution. He is experiencing a minor liquidity delay. A temporary market headwind? A minor liquidity delay. The phrasing is breathtaking in its audacity. I sit beside a forensic wealth manager who printed their notice of default 3 hours ago. I am listening to a man who leveraged his home to secure a $750,000 predatory loan, describe a missed balloon payment as a minor delay. Thomas turns his attention back to me. We are incredibly proud of your recent success, Selena, he continues. Your new position at Croft Enterprises is a remarkable achievement. You have positioned yourself very well. You have resources now. You have liquidity. He lets the word hang in the silent room. Liquidity. He is circling the trap, looking for the perfect opening to spring the jaws. He pivots the conversation away from corporate economics and anchors it to the concept of biological duty. Family is the foundation of everything, he states. When one member of the family succeeds, we all succeed. And when one member faces a hurdle, the family rallies to lift them over it. That is the Murphy way. That is what we have always done. I remain perfectly still. I do not blink. The historical revisionism is a masterpiece of deception. That is what we have always done. They have never lifted me over a single hurdle. They stole my $45,000 college savings account to construct a hurdle for me to jump over. They skipped my master graduation ceremony to drink champagne at a fake networking event. They told me to take out loans and figure it out on my own while they funded leased luxury vehicles and boutique public relations firms for their favorite son. Now they sit across from me invoking a legacy of support that never existed. They believe they can rewrite history with a few polished sentences. Brandon recognizes his cue. He stops tapping his wineglass. He leans forward, resting his elbows on the mahogany table. He attempts to summon his best Silicon Valley founder persona. He steeples his fingers and looks at me with wide, earnest eyes. Selena, I am offering you an incredible opportunity, he says. His voice is smooth, dripping with unearned confidence. An opportunity, I repeat. My voice is a flat, sterile echo in the quiet room. Yes, Brandon insists. He smiles, flashing his expensive porcelain veneers. I need a bridge loan, a temporary capital injection to sustain operations until the institutional funding clears. I am looking for $750,000. He says the number casually, as if he is asking me to cover the cost of a dinner tab. $750,000. He leans closer, projecting an aura of delusion. I could go to a traditional lender, he claims. I could approach any of the boutique venture capital firms downtown. They would jump at the chance to get in on the ground floor. But I want to keep the equity in the family. I am offering you the chance to act as my angel investor. You provide the bridge loan, and I will write you into the capitalization table. When we scale this brand regionally, your return on investment will be astronomical. I am basically handing you generational wealth. I look at Brandon. I study the man who cannot format his own inventory spreadsheets, offering me a stake in a non-existent empire. I look at the brother whose bank accounts were drained by luxury leases and overpriced interior decorators, pretending he is doing me a favor by demanding $750,000. He is a man standing on the edge of a financial cliff, asking me to build the ground beneath his feet so he does not have to fall. Jessica nods enthusiastically beside him, validating his ridiculous proposal. She chimes in with her bright and cheerful voice devoid of any financial literacy. She tells me it is such a smart move. She says the vision of Brandon is going to change the beverage industry, and I am lucky to have the capital to be a part of it. She claims they are going to be unstoppable. Diane stops clearing the plates. She stands near the wooden sideboard, clutching a stack of dirty ceramic dishes. She looks at me. Her eyes are wide with an expectant and desperate energy. She reinforces the extortion pitch. "We would not ask if it was not an emergency, Selena," she says. Her voice trembles, cracking under the weight of her hidden terror. "We just need to get your brother over this hump. Your father and I have done everything we can. Now it is your turn to step up." The sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from the four people in that dining room applies a suffocating pressure to the air. They are asking the daughter they discarded, the daughter they starved of affection and resources, to hand over the equivalent of a minor lottery jackpot to fund a verified lie. They expect immediate compliance. They anticipate a brief negotiation, perhaps a display of hesitation, followed by eventual capitulation. They believe they hold the moral high ground of biological loyalty. They assume that if they feed me cheap pasta and offer a few hollow compliments about my corporate job, I will write a check to save their social status. They fundamentally misunderstand the person sitting across from them. The preamble is over. The jaws of the trap have snapped shut, but they have caught the wrong prey. I sit back in my chair, preparing to initiate the forensic counterattack. Diane clutches the stack of dirty ceramic plates against her chest like a physical shield. Her knuckles turn white from the strain. She attempts to inject a tone of maternal vulnerability into the room, but the underlying terror bleeding through her voice is undeniable. She insists they would never ask for this level of capital if it were not an emergency. She frames the extortion as a sudden, unpredictable tragedy rather than the inevitable consequence of their own reckless financial decisions. She expects me to absorb her panic and translate it into a sense of duty. The suffocating entitlement radiating from my family settles over the mahogany dining table. They sit there waiting for my compliance. They anticipate a brief moment of hesitation followed by my capitulation. They believe the biological tether of our relationship will compel me to write a check. They expect me to purchase their hollow approval by funding the very illusion that ruined them. They want me to hand over $750,000 to a brother who cannot format a spreadsheet just to maintain the aesthetic of their suburban superiority. I do not respond. I do not offer a single syllable of comfort or agreement. I deploy the most effective weapon in any high-stakes corporate negotiation. I utilize tactical silence. Silence is a mirror. It forces manipulators to look at the absurdity of their own demands. In the absence of my expected compliance, the room descends into a tense, breathless vacuum. I keep my posture perfectly rigid. I look directly at my father and I begin to count the seconds in my head. 1. The confident, entrepreneurial smile plastered across the face of Brandon begins to falter. He realizes I am not reaching into my purse for a checkbook. His rehearsed pitch about generational wealth hangs in the air, lacking any foundation. 2. Thomas shifts his weight in the heavy wooden chair. The leather upholstery creaks under his sudden discomfort. He expects me to speak. He expects me to fill the void with questions about interest rates or equity shares or repayment schedules. He wants me to negotiate because negotiation implies a willingness to participate. 3. Diane sets the ceramic plates down on the wooden sideboard. The clatter of the dishes is startling in the quiet room. She rubs her hands together, trying to dispel the nervous energy building in her fingertips. She looks at me with rising confusion, unable to comprehend why her guilt trip failed to produce tears. 4. Jessica looks around the table. Her brow furrows. She senses the sudden drop in temperature, but she lacks the financial context to understand why the mood shifted from a celebratory investment pitch to a hostile standoff. She glances at her diamond tennis bracelet and then back to her fiancé. 5. The silence stretches until it becomes a physical weight pressing down on their chests. They are cornered by my refusal to engage with their script. My lack of emotional reaction paralyzes their strategy. They built a trap designed for a desperate daughter seeking their love. They do not know how to operate the mechanism against a corporate executive who feels nothing for them. 6. Brandon wipes a fresh bead of sweat from his forehead. The designer linen shirt he wears offers no protection against the panic entering his bloodstream. He opens his mouth to speak, attempting to fill the dead air with more hollow buzzwords. He wants to talk about scaling the brand or disrupting the beverage sector. He wants to distract me from the math. I do not let him speak. I cut off his escape route before he can form the words. I turn my head slightly to the left. I do not break my posture. I look at Marcus sitting quietly beside me. I deliver a single, barely perceptible nod. Marcus understands the signal. He operates with the clinical precision of a man who spends his life dismantling fraudulent empires. He is not here to mediate a family dispute. He is here to execute a data delivery. He reaches for the thick manila envelope resting near his silverware. The crisp sound of his heavy paper sliding across the polished mahogany table echoes through the dining room like a gunshot. It is a sharp, definitive noise that severs the remaining tension in the room. My family watches his movements with rising alarm. They invited an unknown variable into their home, and they are about to discover his function. They expected me to pull a pen from my bag. They did not expect the forensic wealth manager in the tailored charcoal suit to initiate an audit right next to their store-bought pie. Marcus unclasps the metal fastener of the envelope. He flips the protective flap open. He reaches inside and extracts a dense stack of certified public filings. He does not hand them to me. He places the documents directly in the center of the table, right beneath the glare of the crystal chandelier. The bright light illuminates the stark black ink and the raised tactile seals of the notary stamps. The heavy legal paper contrasts sharply with the cheap wine glasses and the remnants of the baked pasta. The paperwork rests equidistant from Thomas and Brandon. It is a physical manifestation of their ruin, presented in chronological order. I reach out and place my hand flat on top of the documents. The cool, smooth surface of the paper grounds me. The time for passive-aggressive pleasantries is officially terminated. The polite suburban dinner has concluded. I look directly at Thomas. The authoritative patriarch who tried to diminish my career 10 minutes ago is gone. He stares at the stack of legal filings with wide, terrified eyes. He recognizes the format of the documents. He knows exactly what kind of paperwork carries those specific municipal stamps. He sees the bold lettering of the commercial loan agreement peeking out from the stack. He realizes his secret is sitting on the table exposed to the light. I speak. My voice is sharp and clear, slicing through the stale air of the dining room like a surgical blade. I discard the role of the quiet observer. I adopt the cadence of a corporate liquidator evaluating a toxic asset. You are not experiencing a temporary market headwind, Dad, I state. Thomas flinches as the words strike him. He tries to look away, but I hold his gaze, pinning him to his chair with undeniable facts. His hands grip the edge of the table as if bracing for an impact. You are not dealing with a minor liquidity delay, I continue. You are not asking for a bridge loan to sustain operations until institutional funding clears. I slide the top document toward him. It is the commercial loan agreement bearing the signatures of both my parents. The ink is dark and permanent, detailing the exact terms of their surrender. I slide the second document toward Brandon. It is the notice of default filed in the civil court system 14 days ago. The red stamp of the municipal clerk glares against the white page. Let us stop pretending we are negotiating an angel investment, I instruct them. Let us discuss the raw data. The dining room descends into a chaotic and terrified silence. The facade shatters entirely. The illusion of the Silicon Valley founder and the wealthy suburban executives evaporates, leaving behind three desperate people trapped in a nightmare of their own making. The other shoe has finally dropped, and it carries the weight of $750,000. You are asking for a bailout to prevent an active foreclosure, I say. I ensure my articulation is flawless, so no one in the room can misinterpret the reality of their situation. You are experiencing a default. The collection call has officially transitioned into a corporate deposition. The suburban dining room transforms into an interrogation chamber. They brought me here to manipulate my emotions, but I brought the forensic evidence required to dismantle their lives. The power dynamic shifts irreversibly. They are no longer the authorities dictating the terms of my existence. They are the targets of an investigation, and I hold all the findings. Thomas stares at the notice of default. The red ink of the municipal stamp reflects the light of the crystal chandelier. He looks at the legal paper, as if it is a live explosive placed directly on his dinner plate. He does not reach out to touch it. He seems to believe that keeping his hands folded in his lap will somehow negate the reality of the document. The polished suburban patriarch dissolves in front of my eyes. His rigid posture crumbles. The veins in his neck strain against his collar. He shifts his gaze from the foreclosure notice to my face. His eyes are wide with a mixture of terror and outrage. He demands to know where I acquired these filings. His voice drops the formal negotiation tone and adopts a harsh defensive rasp. He points a shaking finger at Marcus sitting quietly beside me. He accuses my colleague of conducting an illegal investigation. He claims the corporate financial records of the brewery are private family business. I correct his assumption with a level and clinical voice. I tell him public civil court filings are not private. I state that anyone with an internet connection and a basic understanding of municipal law can access a notice of default in the state of Missouri. You invited an executive to your home to pitch a $750,000 investment, I remind him. I simply conducted standard due diligence on your proposed venture. I analyzed the collateral securing your debt. The data indicates your collateral is currently scheduled for public auction. The cold logic of my response neutralizes his outrage. Thomas has no counter-argument for empirical evidence. He sinks back into his heavy wooden chair. He stares at the mahogany grain of the table. The silence returns to the room, but my mother refuses to sit in the discomfort of her own ruin. Diane deploys her ultimate defense mechanism. She begins to weep. The tears do not stem from genuine remorse or reflective sorrow. The display is a loud theatrical performance designed to shift the gravity of the room. She covers her face with her hands. Her shoulders heave with exaggerated force. She ensures the sound of her sobbing fills every corner of the formal dining room. When I was a child, this specific emotional display forced me into immediate submission. I would apologize for upsetting her and shrink my own needs to restore the peace of the household. She relies on that historical programming. She expects her weeping to act as a shield against financial accountability. Diane lowers her hands. Her eyes are red and watering. She fixes me with a look of profound betrayal. She asks how I can sit there and act so cold. She accuses me of treating my own flesh and blood like strangers in a corporate boardroom. "We did the best we could, Selena," she wails. "We made mistakes, but we love you. You are keeping score against your own brother. You are punishing us for trying to build a family legacy. It is cruel." I look at the tears streaming down her cheeks. I feel no urge to comfort her. I experience no guilt. The emotional manipulation bounces off my armor like rain against steel. The younger version of me would have crumbled under the accusation of cruelty. The current version of me recognizes the tears as a final desperate negotiation tactic. She is trying to use my empathy to fund her insolvency. I tell her I am not keeping score. My voice is steady and devoid of inflection. The municipal court is keeping score. The commercial lender is keeping score. I am simply reading the scoreboard. I reach into the interior pocket of my tailored blazer. I withdraw a small black notebook. It is a pocket-sized ledger bound in imitation leather. I place it on the table next to the foreclosure documents. The tactile sound of the cardboard cover hitting the wood draws the attention of everyone in the room. Brandon stops sweating long enough to stare at the book. Jessica leans back in her chair, sensing a new layer of the disaster unfolding. "You want to invoke family loyalty," I say. "You want to talk about blood and legacy. Let us look at the historical data of your loyalty. I did not just audit your commercial debt. I audited your parenting." I open the black notebook. The pages contain neat handwritten columns. During my years working at the logistics warehouse, I maintained a detailed log of our communication. I used it as a grounding mechanism to remind myself why I needed to endure the physical pain of the loading dock. I look at the first page and begin to read the raw data aloud. 48 months, I state. Over the last 4 years, I initiated 82 phone calls to this house. You answered exactly 14 of them. You returned 0 voicemails. You initiated exactly 5 outgoing calls to my number. Every single one of those 5 calls involved a demand for me to perform free labor for Brandon. You never called to ask if I was healthy. You never called to ask if I was safe. You called to demand I fix pitch decks and troubleshoot inventory spreadsheets. Thomas opens his mouth to interrupt, but I raise my hand, cutting him off with a sharp gesture. I tell him I am presenting the data. I instruct him to sit there and listen. He closes his mouth and looks down at his plate. The authority in the room now belongs entirely to me. I turn the page of the notebook. I read from the second column. While Brandon lived in a luxury loft downtown, I woke up at 3:45 in the morning. I spent my mornings lifting 50-pound shipping crates. I spent my evenings keying in data sets until my vision blurred. I survived on a deficit of sleep and nutrition. I accrued zero debt. I graduated with a master's degree and highest departmental honors. I trace my finger down the paper to the third column. During that exact same 48-month period, I review your resource allocation. You liquidated my $45,000 college fund to purchase reclaimed wood tables and Edison bulbs for a warehouse that produces zero revenue. You funded a boutique public relations firm for Brandon, incurring a monthly liability of $3,000. You leased a luxury SUV. Last week you spent thousands of dollars on imported prosciutto and champagne for a tasting event promoting a non-existent product. I closed the notebook. And while you were drinking that champagne, you left 2 folding chairs empty at my graduation, I remind them. You sent me a text message calling my degree pointless. The dining room is paralyzed. The raw numerical history of their neglect strips away any remaining illusion of maternal sacrifice or paternal guidance. They cannot argue with the call logs. They cannot dispute the timeline of the stolen tuition. The data does not possess emotions. It does not hold grudges. It simply reflects the choices they made. I direct my focus back to Brandon. You sit here asking for a bridge loan, I say. I am demonstrating that Thomas and Diane possess a 100% failure rate when it comes to investing in your ventures. They possess a 100% failure rate when it comes to supporting my future. You are asking me to inject $750,000 into a system designed to exploit me. I lean forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the table. I ask him why I would ever invest my capital into a toxic asset. Diane reduces her sobs to quiet, ragged hiccups. She realizes the tears are ineffective. The emotional currency she relied on for decades is devalued to zero. Thomas rubs his temples, his breathing shallow and rapid. Brandon stares at his empty wine glass, a hollow shell of the confident entrepreneur who tried to sell me an angel investment 10 minutes ago. The gridlock of their own failures traps them. The realization washes over their faces in slow, agonizing waves. They cannot bully me. They cannot guilt me. They cannot outsmart the forensic evidence sitting in the center of their dining table. The structural foundation of their enmeshed dynamic is cracking under the weight of the truth. They are entirely at my mercy, and they are beginning to understand that I possess none. The pressure in the room reaches a critical threshold. The truth is too heavy for the current structure to support, and the resulting collapse is about to force them to turn their fury upon each other. I direct my focus away from the tears of my mother and the silent panic of my brother. I look across the mahogany table at Jessica. The digital lifestyle curator sits frozen in her chair. Her phone screen has gone dark. For the last 6 months, she curated a digital identity built entirely around the fabricated success of her fiancé. She posted updates to her followers portraying a life of effortless entrepreneurial glamour. She genuinely believed she was marrying an emerging titan of the Midwestern beverage industry. She is suddenly trapped in an unscripted reality, and she lacks the financial literacy to understand the depth of the disaster unfolding around her. I intend to translate the data into a language she understands. I look back at my father. I instruct him to read the second paragraph of the subordination clause out loud. Thomas stares at the legal document resting on the table. His hands remain locked in his lap. He shakes his head, offering a weak and breathy refusal. He pleads with me, stating that this is a private family matter, and we do not need to read legal contracts like a corporate deposition. He believes he can still keep the darkest details of his ruin hidden from his future daughter-in-law. I deny his request for secrecy. I tell him we are treating this exactly like a corporate deposition. I remind him he invited an executive to his home to ask for $750,000. I compel him to disclose the state of his collateral to his potential investor. I issue a clear directive. Read the clause, Dad, or Marcus will read it for you. Marcus shifts his posture in the chair beside me. He rests his hands lightly on the table, preparing to speak. The threat of a forensic wealth manager broadcasting his financial ruin breaks the resolve of my father. Thomas realizes he has lost control of the room. He slowly reaches out and pulls the commercial loan agreement closer. His fingers tremble against the heavy paper. He squints at the fine print. In the event of default, he reads. His voice is barely a whisper, lacking any of its usual patriarchal authority. The guarantor Thomas and Diane Murphy surrender all equity claims to the primary residence located in Chesterfield, Missouri. He stops reading. He cannot bring himself to finish the paragraph. I do not let him stop. I instruct him to read the final sentence. Thomas swallows hard. His throat bobs. The lender retains the immediate right to initiate foreclosure proceedings and seize the estate to satisfy the outstanding principal, he chokes out. The words hang in the stale air of the dining room. It is a stark and undeniable admission of their impending ruin. They do not own the suburban estate. The bank owns it, and the bank is coming to collect. I turn my gaze back to Jessica. The young woman sits rigid, her manicured nails digging into the edge of the mahogany table. Her eyes scan the bold legal print from across the distance. I watch her lips move silently as she processes the phrase property seizure. Now I say, addressing her directly, ask him what his company is worth. Ask the visionary founder sitting next to you for his current profit and loss statement. Jessica slowly turns her head to look at Brandon. My brother looks as though the oxygen has been vacuumed from his lungs. His face is pale and slick with nervous sweat. The confident veneer he wore since childhood is gone. It is replaced by the terrified expression of a cornered fraud. Brandon, she whispers. Her voice is thin and sharp. What does she mean? You told me the institutional distribution funding was a guaranteed lock. You said the local investors were fighting over equity shares at the tasting event last week. Brandon opens his mouth, but no sound emerges. He looks at Thomas and Diane for help, but my mother is staring at her plate, and my father is staring at the foreclosure notice. The golden child is stripped of his protectors. He is forced to defend his own delusion. Answer her, Brandon, I command. My tone is devoid of any sympathy. Tell your fiancée the truth. Tell her you do not have any distributors. Tell her the holding company is functionally bankrupt. Jess, please, Brandon stammers. He reaches for her arm, but she jerks away from him as if his touch burns. It is just a temporary cash flow issue. I swear, I have pending meetings lined up downtown next week. The intellectual property is solid. The branding is scaling. We just need to ride out this rough patch. He relies on the hollow buzzwords that worked for him in the past. He hopes the corporate jargon will confuse her long enough to secure her loyalty. He underestimates the presence of a forensic auditor. Marcus intervenes with clinical precision. He does not raise his voice, but his words slice through the frantic backpedaling of my brother. I pulled the corporate filings this afternoon, Marcus states. The Limited Liability Corporation holds zero proprietary intellectual property. There are no pending patents. There is no active brewing permit. The corporate accounts currently hold a negative balance due to overdraft fees triggered by a luxury vehicle lease. Jessica stands up. Her chair scrapes loudly against the hardwood floor. She looks down at Brandon and her face contorts with unadulterated anger. The realization hits her with the force of a physical strike. She connects the timeline of his failure to the timeline of their relationship. The expensive dinners and the luxury loft and the curated lifestyle were all funded by a predatory loan. She is standing inside a house that was sacrificed to buy her affection. You told me we were buying a summer property next year, she screams. Her voice rises in pitch, shattering the quiet of the room. You told me the tasting event was a victory lap. You let me stand there and network with those people bragging about a beverage brand that does not exist. You humiliated me in front of my entire digital audience. Jessica, please, Brandon pleads. His voice cracks. He stands up, reaching for her again. I did it for us. I needed to project success so the distributors would take me seriously. I just needed a little more time. You are a fraud. Jessica spits the word at him. She looks at her left hand. She stares at the diamond engagement ring glittering on her finger. She realizes the stone was purchased with the stolen equity of the house she is currently standing in. She yanks the ring off her finger. She hurls the jewelry onto the mahogany table. The platinum band skitters across the polished wood and comes to rest near the store-bought pie. I am not going down with a sinking ship, she announces. She turns her back on him and marches out of the formal dining room. Her footsteps echo down the hallway. A few seconds later, the heavy oak front door slams shut. The impact rattles the cheap generic painting hanging in the foyer. The engagement is officially terminated. Brandon slumps back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. The golden child stripped of his audience and his enabler looks small and defeated. He is a man facing federal bankruptcy without a single ally to cushion his fall. The collapse of the engagement triggers a secondary fracture. With the outside observer gone, the united front of my parents disintegrates. Diane stops crying. She lowers her hands, and her tear-streaked face hardens into a mask of pure, self-righteous fury. She turns her anger not toward Brandon, the architect of the disaster, but toward Thomas. This is your fault, Diane hisses. She points a shaking finger at my father. You told me the bridge loan was a safe investment. You told me that commercial lender was a reputable firm. You convinced me to subordinate the mortgage and sign that paperwork. The head of my father snaps up. His eyes narrow, defensive and vicious. Do not put this entirely on me, Diane, he roars back. You were the one pushing for the public relations firm. You were the one who insisted Brandon needed to network. You wanted the prestige of telling your friends at the golf course that your son was a chief executive officer. You practically guided his hand when he signed the commercial lease for that empty warehouse. I trusted your financial judgment, she screams, standing up from her chair. You are supposed to protect this family. Instead, you gambled our home on a pipe dream. Where are we going to live, Thomas? Where are we going to go when the bank changes the locks next month? We would not be in this situation if you had not spoiled him his entire life. Thomas shouts, slamming his fist on the table. The cheap wine spills over the rim of his glass, staining the tablecloth. You never made him work for anything. You funded every ridiculous idea he ever had, and now the bill has come due. The dining room descends into chaos. The carefully constructed facade of the wealthy suburban family violently collapses in on itself. My parents tear into each other, hurling decades of resentment and unspoken blame across the table. They expose the rot at the core of their marriage, screaming about failed investments and coddled children and impending foreclosure. Brandon sits between them, silent and paralyzed, watching his parents fight over the wreckage of his ego. I sit back in my chair. I do not raise my voice. I do not intervene to stop the screaming. I watch the enmeshed, toxic structure dissolve. For 24 years, they forced me to carry the weight of their dysfunction. They cast me in the role of the ungrateful daughter to maintain the illusion of their perfect son. They demanded I shrink my ambitions and sacrifice my resources to keep their fraudulent narrative intact. Now the narrative is dead. I did not cause their ruin. I did not force them to sign predatory loans or fund vaporware brewing concepts. I simply brought the forensic data to the table. I exposed the truth they were so desperate to hide. The conflict has moved entirely off my shoulders and now rests squarely on theirs. The suffocating pressure I felt since childhood evaporates, replaced by a clinical detachment. I wait for the screaming to die down, knowing the final phase of the corporate audit is approaching. The shouting eventually burns out. The adrenaline that fueled their bitter civil war dissipates into the stale air of the dining room. Diane leans heavily against the wooden sideboard, her chest heaving as she gasps for breath. Her designer dress is wrinkled. Her hair has lost its meticulous styling. Thomas slumps in his chair at the head of the table. He rubs his temples, attempting to soothe a headache born of his own financial incompetence. Brandon remains catatonic. He stares at the empty space where his fiancée was sitting minutes ago. The room is enveloped in an exhausted silence. The physical toll of confronting their ruin has drained their energy. Yet despite the forensic evidence and the shattered engagement, they still operate under a profound illusion. They believe the argument was simply the chaotic phase of a standard negotiation. In their minds, families fight and scream and exchange bitter accusations, but ultimately, they protect each other. They assume the climax of the evening was the shouting match itself. They anticipate the healing process will now commence. They expect that process to begin with my checkbook. They turn their eyes back to me. Their expressions carry a lingering, desperate hope. They think I will rescue them out of pity. I do not feel pity. I reach into the interior pocket of my tailored blazer. I bypass the small black notebook and withdraw a single sheet of heavy legal paper. I place it flat on the mahogany table. I push it forward until it rests directly in the center of the wood. It sits equidistant from my mother and my father. The stark white paper contrasts with the dark wood grain. This is a voluntary relinquishment of family financial obligations, I state. My voice is calm and measured, cutting through the lingering tension in the room. It was drafted by the legal department at Croft Enterprises. Thomas squints at the document. He does not reach for it. He asks what it is. His voice is drained of its usual booming authority. He sounds like a weary old man facing an eviction notice. It is a legal boundary, I explain. It is a formalized declaration that I bear no responsibility for the financial liabilities incurred by Thomas Murphy or Diane Murphy or Brandon Murphy. I watch their faces as I outline the parameters of my refusal. I state that the document explicitly prohibits me from assuming their commercial debts. It dictates that I will not co-sign a loan modification with their predatory lender. I will not act as a guarantor for any future lines of credit. And most importantly, it documents that I will not provide a single dollar to prevent the foreclosure of this estate. Diane lets out a sharp, involuntary gasp. She leans forward, her eyes darting between my face and the paper. She tells me I cannot mean that. Her voice carries the raw and frantic edge of a woman watching her last life raft drift out of reach. She claims people say things they do not mean when they are upset. She insists we can fix this. She promises they will draw up a repayment plan and return every cent with interest once Brandon secures a real job. I look at Diane. I analyze her desperate bargaining. I tell her I am not upset. I am operating with flawless clarity. You cannot pay me back because you possess zero earning potential and $750,000 in immediate debt, I reply. Any capital I hand you would not be an investment. It would be a sacrificial offering thrown into an incinerator. I am not going to fund your insolvency. The reality of my refusal finally penetrates the denial of my father. The remaining color drains from his face. He looks at the legal document and then looks up at me. The anger he displayed earlier melts into pure, unfiltered panic. He realizes his manipulation tactics have failed. He realizes the data I brought to the table was not a bluff. I am actually going to let them sink. Thomas resorts to the final primal weapon in his arsenal. He attempts to weaponize my nostalgia. He tries to use the physical architecture of the house to trigger a dormant sense of biological duty. Selena, we are your parents, he pleads. His voice cracks, losing its polished suburban cadence. He gestures around the formal dining room. Look around you. This is your childhood home. He points toward the hallway. You took your first steps on those hardwood floors, he says. His voice trembles. He points toward the ceiling. Look at the crown molding. We marked your height on the inside of the pantry door every single birthday. We hosted your elementary school graduation party in the backyard. You grew up within these walls. You know every corner of this property. He stares at me with wide, begging eyes. He expects the memories of the house to soften my resolve. He wants me to look at the architectural details and feel an overwhelming obligation to protect his real estate. You are really going to sit there and let a bank take it all away, he asks. You are going to let us lose our home. I do not feel an obligation to the crown molding or the hardwood floors. I feel the smooth, cold surface of the mahogany table under my fingertips. I look at the man who authorized the theft of my college fund. I look at the woman who mocked my academic achievements. I hold his gaze. I do not blink. I do not look away. You lost your home the day you gambled it on the ego of Brandon instead of attending my graduation, I state. The words land in the room like physical blows. Thomas flinches. Diane closes her eyes, allowing fresh tears to leak past her eyelashes. Brandon lowers his head until his chin touches his chest. The truth of my statement offers no room for debate or negotiation. They weighed the value of their shelter against the allure of fake prestige, and they chose the fraud. They placed the deed to their house on a roulette wheel, hoping to win the admiration of their country club friends. The wheel landed on a loss. I am simply refusing to cover their bad bet. I reach into my pocket and retrieve a silver pen. The metal is cool and heavy in my hand. I uncap it. I press the tip of the pen to the signature line at the bottom of the relinquishment document. I sign my name using clear and deliberate strokes. The ink sinks into the heavy paper, solidifying my new reality. I slide the paper to my left. Marcus picks up his own pen. He signs his name on the witness line with quick, efficient movements. He reaches into his leather briefcase and produces a certified notary stamp. He positions the device over the bottom corner of the page. He presses down firmly. The loud, metallic clamp of the seal echoes through the quiet suburban house. It leaves a raised, tactile impression in the thick paper. The sound is the final nail in the coffin of their expectations. The severance is now ironclad. It is recognized by the state of Missouri. My financial and emotional liability is officially terminated. I take the document and push it across the table until it rests in front of my father. I advise him to keep it for his records. I tell him he will need to show it to the bankruptcy court when the judge asks if he has any family members capable of curing the default. The collection call is over. The extortion attempt is dismantled. The Murphy family dynamic, built on decades of inequity and quiet exploitation, is legally and permanently dead. I have protected my hard-earned wealth. I have drawn a boundary they can never cross again. The defensive phase of my strategy is complete. I neutralized their attack and shielded my assets from their grasp. But the evening is not concluded. Severing my ties was only the first half of my objective. I did not drive all the way from downtown St. Louis to Chesterfield simply to hand them a refusal. I came to deliver a piece of information that will alter their understanding of my true power. I lean back in my chair. I adjust the cuffs of my tailored blazer. The emotional and chaotic portion of the dinner is finished. It is time to transition to the sterile and ruthless realm of corporate acquisition. I turn my attention away from my parents. I focus my gaze entirely on my brother. The time for defense has passed. It is time for the final strike. I shift my physical posture in the chair. The defensive maneuver is finalized. The signed relinquishment document rests on the mahogany table, serving as a permanent shield between my assets and their liabilities. The emotional extortion is dead. But walking away now would leave the equation unbalanced. They invited me here to manipulate my loyalty. I intend to leave them with a profound understanding of their own insignificance. I turn my attention away from my parents. I lock my gaze onto my older brother. Brandon is staring at the empty chair where his fiancée was sitting minutes ago. His shoulders are slumped. The designer linen shirt clings to his skin. He is attempting to process the sudden evaporation of his curated digital lifestyle. He spent his entire adult life acting like a chief executive officer while treating other people as disposable resources. He is now discovering what happens when the resources decide to walk out the front door. I speak his name. The tone of my voice changes. I discard the quiet restraint I maintained throughout the dinner. I adopt the sharp and analytical cadence I use in the boardroom at Croft Enterprises. It is a precise vocal register designed to cut through corporate posturing and demand immediate answers. Brandon slowly lifts his head. His eyes are red and exhausted. He looks at me with a mixture of confusion and lingering resentment. He still believes I am just the ungrateful sister who refused to write a check. He thinks the worst part of his evening has already occurred. I require a piece of data from my internal records, I state. I need you to confirm the exact legal entity holding your toxic commercial debt. Who originated the predatory loan that triggered the foreclosure on this estate? Brandon blinks. He wipes a bead of sweat from his temple. He does not understand why I'm asking for administrative details. You just signed a piece of paper refusing to help us, he mutters. His voice sounds hollow and pathetic. Why do you care who holds the paper? You already proved you do not give a damn about this family. I do not let him deflect. I lean forward, resting my forearms on the edge of the table. I do not care about this family, I agree. My voice is stripped of any familial inflection. I care about the data. Answer the question, Brandon. What is the name of the boutique venture capital firm that issued your bridge loan? The authoritative command forces his compliance. He has no energy left to argue. He swallows hard and looks away from my gaze. Gateway Horizon Partners, he mumbles. They operate out of a commercial suite in downtown St. Louis. I let the name of the lender hover in the quiet dining room. I look at Marcus sitting to my left. The forensic wealth manager remains perfectly still, but a subtle shift occurs in his posture. He knows the trap is about to close. I look back at my brother. I offer a smile. It is not a smile of warmth or familial reconciliation. It is the precise and terrifying expression of a predator who has successfully cornered its prey. It is the smile of a mathematician watching a complex equation resolve into a perfect zero. That is exactly what the filings indicated, I say softly. The dining room falls silent again, but this is a different kind of quiet. It is the breathless and suspended silence of a pendulum reaching its apex before swinging downward. My parents and my brother sit in the wreckage of their own entitlement, staring at the notarized document that guarantees their financial ruin. They think the confrontation is over. They think they simply lost a battle for a bailout. They do not understand they are about to lose the entire war. I reach out and pick up the thick manila envelope Marcus provided. I open the metal clasp one final time. I reach inside and extract a single sheet of paper. It is not a court filing. It is not a property deed. It is a corporate press release printed on high-quality, heavy stock paper. The distinct logo of Croft Enterprises is embossed at the top in dark blue ink. I place the document on the table. I slide it across the smooth wood. It comes to rest directly in front of my father. Read the headline, Thomas, I command. My father stares at the paper. His eyes track the bold black letters. He does not read it out loud. His mouth opens slightly. A silent gasp escapes his lips. The remaining color drains completely from his face, leaving him a chalky and sickly white. He looks as though the floor beneath his chair has suddenly vanished. Diane leans over, straining to read the text from her side of the table. What does it say, she asks. Her voice is thin and shaky. She is struggling to connect the corporate terminology to her current domestic crisis. What does Croft Enterprises have to do with the loan? I keep my eyes locked on Brandon as I answer her question. I will read it for you, I volunteer. Croft Enterprises announces the acquisition of Gateway Horizon Partners in a strategic buyout designed to restructure distressed commercial assets. Brandon stops breathing. The meaning of the headline pierces through his panic. He stares at me, his jaw slack. 3 weeks ago, I explained my algorithm identified Gateway Horizon Partners as a prime acquisition target. They were severely over-leveraged. They issued far too many predatory bridge loans to founders who possessed zero revenue and zero viable intellectual property. They handed out hundreds of thousands of dollars to fake entrepreneurs, exactly like you, Brandon. I pause, letting the cold reality of my words sink into his bones. Gateway Horizon was drowning in toxic debt. I continue. Their balance sheets were built on the illusion that men like you would eventually scale your brands and repay the principal. My software stripped away their corporate narrative and exposed the rot. They were weeks away from their own bankruptcy. Elias Croft authorized a hostile takeover. Croft Enterprises purchased their entire portfolio of distressed debt for pennies on the dollar. Thomas raises a trembling hand. He points a finger at the press release. He looks from the paper to my face and back again. You bought the debt, he whispers. His voice is barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator in the adjacent kitchen. I did not buy it personally, I correct him. My conglomerate bought it. But Elias Croft did not hire me to sit in a cubicle and analyze theoretical trends. He hired me to build a division. He handed me a $5 million operating budget to identify and acquire these failing boutique firms. He assigned me as the Director of Operations Optimization to oversee the restructuring of the newly acquired portfolios. I pivot my full attention back to the golden child. The beloved son who spent his youth mocking my work ethic is trembling visibly. His hands shake so much he has to grip the edge of the mahogany table to steady himself. You sat here tonight and asked me to act as your angel investor, I say. I speak to him not as a sister, but as an executive examining a terminal liability. You offered me a position on your capitalization table. You tried to sell me the fiction that you were a visionary, experiencing a minor liquidity delay. You wanted me to fund the aesthetic of your warehouse. I lean forward, bridging the physical distance across the table. I am not your angel investor, Brandon, I state. I am your corporate liquidator. I am the executive assigned to review your specific file. I am the person who analyzes your burn rate. I evaluate your non-existent inventory. I determine the maximum recovery value for Croft Enterprises. Diane lets out a strangled cry. She covers her mouth with her hands. Her eyes are wide with unadulterated terror. She finally understands the architecture of the trap. The daughter she summoned for a bailout is the architect of the foreclosure. Selena. Please, Diane begs. The artificial matriarch is gone, replaced by a weeping and desperate tenant. You cannot do this. You have the power to stop the bank. You can clear the debt. You have the authority to wipe the slate clean. I look at my mother. I see the frantic hope flare in her eyes. She thinks my admission of power is a prelude to mercy. She believes the revelation of my corporate authority means I will use it to rescue their suburban estate. She assumes the biological tether will ultimately override my professional judgment. I do have the authority, I confirm. My voice is as hard and unforgiving as diamond. I have the authority to restructure the commercial loan. I have the authority to offer a forbearance period. I possess the executive clearance to write off the $750,000 debt entirely as a corporate loss. I look around the table, making eye contact with all three of them. I let them taste the possibility of salvation for one brief second. But I am not going to do any of those things, I declare. The hope in the eyes of my mother extinguishes instantly. It is replaced by a dark and suffocating despair. She realizes the biological tether she relied upon for decades has been severed. Thomas stares at me across the mahogany table. His face is pale and drawn. He asks me why I am doing this. He asks why I would let my own family lose their home when I possess the executive authority to erase the debt with a single signature. He demands to know how I can sit there and let the house burn. I answer him with the clinical detachment of a corporate auditor. I explain the concept of fiduciary duty. I tell him I am an executive officer of Croft Enterprises. I possess a legal and ethical mandate to maximize the recovery value on all distressed portfolios acquired by my conglomerate. Forgiving a $750,000 commercial loan for a relative constitutes a severe breach of corporate ethics. It is financial malfeasance. It is actionable fraud. I keep my voice perfectly level, ensuring the acoustics of the dining room carry every syllable to his ears. I state that Brandon committed wire fraud by submitting fabricated financial projections to secure that commercial paper. You and Diane enabled that fraud by subordinating your mortgage to back a non-existent asset, I explain. I will not risk my executive career and my legal freedom to subsidize your incompetence. The data dictates liquidation, and I am bound by the data. I pause and look at the three of them, sitting in the wreckage of their curated suburban lives. I tell them that beyond the corporate mandate lies the personal equation. From a personal standpoint, I am simply closing the loop they initiated 4 years ago. I remind them they emptied my tuition fund to buy aesthetic lighting for an empty warehouse. They funded a boutique public relations campaign while I lifted heavy freight on a freezing concrete loading dock. They skipped my graduation to drink champagne in a vacant room. They placed their shelter on the roulette wheel of Brandon and his ego. The wheel stopped spinning. They lost the bet. I am just the person collecting the chips. I do not wait for a rebuttal. There is no counter-argument to objective reality. I stand up from the mahogany table. Marcus stands simultaneously mirroring my precise movements. He reaches out and places the signed relinquishment document into his leather briefcase. The sharp snap of the brass clasps echoes through the silent dining room, sounding like a gavel striking wood. I turn my back on my family. I walk down the hallway of the estate. I do not look at the crown molding or the height marks penciled on the inside of the pantry door. I open the heavy oak door and step out into the cool evening air of the Missouri suburbs. Marcus follows me and pulls the door shut. The deadbolt clicks into place. The burden of their expectations stays locked inside that house. I walk down the cracked concrete driveway and get into my vehicle. I drive away without looking in the rearview mirror. The passage of time is a ruthless auditor. It does not accept excuses, and it does not grant extensions based on emotional manipulation. 6 months pass since that dinner in Chesterfield. I do not need to contact my parents to learn their fate. The public records generated by the civil court system tell the story with unbiased accuracy. Croft Enterprises executed the foreclosure process with standard corporate efficiency. Thomas and Diane received their eviction notice in late autumn. The bank seized the pristine suburban estate. My parents were forced to host a humiliating estate sale to afford a security deposit on a new rental unit. They sold the mahogany dining table and the remaining silver mirrors to strangers. The house went to public auction on a Tuesday morning. A commercial developer purchased the property and immediately began gutting the interior. My parents lost their primary asset and their social prestige. They moved into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in an undesirable zip code far away from the country club. Their affluent friends abandoned them the moment the notice of default became public knowledge within their social circle. They live in isolation, hiding from a society that only valued them for their perceived wealth. The artisanal brewing concept of Brandon was dissolved by the state. The reclaimed wood tables and the copper bar tops were liquidated to satisfy secondary creditors. Brandon faced the reality of the labor market with no actual skills and a destroyed credit score. Today, the visionary founder works 40 hours a week at a mid-tier retail clothing store in a suburban shopping mall. He spends his shifts folding polo shirts and counting inventory in a stockroom. He wears a synthetic uniform bearing a plastic name tag. He answers to a regional manager who is 5 years younger than him. The irony of his situation is mathematically perfect. He spent his youth acting like a chief executive officer, only to end up managing a cash register. My current reality is defined entirely by the environment I chose to build. I sit in my corner office on the 34th floor of the Croft Enterprises building. The panoramic glass windows offer an unobstructed view of the St. Louis skyline. I watch the cargo barges navigate the dark waters of the Mississippi River beneath the shadow of the Gateway Arch. My desk is organized. My mind is clear. I oversee a team of highly skilled data scientists. We are currently developing a secondary algorithm designed to identify fraudulent sustainability reports in the manufacturing sector. I do not work in isolation anymore. I am surrounded by a chosen family of colleagues who recognize my intellect as an asset rather than a threat to their fragile egos. Elias Croft trusts my strategic judgment implicitly. Marcus operates 3 doors down from my office, and we frequently collaborate on complex asset extractions. I am valued for my output and my precision and my resilience. I am not asked to shrink myself to accommodate someone else. I am expected to lead. The path from that sweltering university parking lot to this executive office was not paved with forgiveness. It was paved with cold, hard boundaries. Society conditions us to believe that biological ties require unconditional sacrifice. We are told to excuse toxic behavior in the name of family loyalty. We are instructed to keep setting ourselves on fire just to keep our relatives warm. Loyalty should never be a suicide pact. If people view you as a disposable resource, You do not owe them your time, or your capital, or your mercy. You owe yourself the right to walk away. Boundaries are not acts of cruelty. Boundaries are survival. They are the defensive structures we build to protect the life we earned from the exact people who refuse to help us build it. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you, and you cannot thrive while carrying the dead weight of someone else and their delusion. So I want to pose a question to everyone listening right now. Think about that mahogany table. Think about the legal document resting in the center of it under the glare of the crystal chandelier. Would you have signed that paper and walked out the door to build your own empire? Or would you have liquidated their assets even faster to teach them a lesson? Let me know your exact strategy in the comments below. I read every single one, and I love seeing how this community navigates the hard choices. Looking out at the river from my office, I sometimes think about that hot day in Colombia. The girl who stared at those empty folding chairs feels like a lifetime away. Today I do not just have a seat at the table, I own the boardroom. The journey from a discarded daughter to a corporate liquidator taught me truths that no textbook could ever provide. First, I learned that your true worth is never determined by the people who refuse to see it. My family looked at me and saw a convenient background character to exploit, but the market looked at me and saw a highly valued asset. You must be the first person to calculate your own value. Second, I learned that numbers never lie, but people always will. When you strip away the emotional manipulation and the theatrical tears, the raw data of how someone consistently treats you will always reveal their actual priorities. Finally, I learned that setting boundaries is the healthiest choice you can make. If you have ever had to cut ties to save your own future, I want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Did I go too far, or did I do exactly what the data required? Thank you for listening to my journey here on Senior Echo Stories. Remember to hit that subscribe button, always protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one. I look out over the Mississippi River from my corporate office. The journey from a discarded daughter to a corporate liquidator taught me truths that no textbook could ever provide. I learned two vital lessons from the wreckage of my family. First, I learned that your true worth is never determined by the people who refuse to see it. My parents looked at me and saw a convenient background character to exploit, but the market looked at me and saw a highly valued asset. You must be the first person to calculate your own value. Second, I learned that numbers never lie, but people always will. When you strip away the emotional manipulation and the theatrical tears, the raw data of how someone consistently treats you will always reveal their actual priorities. Setting firm boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but an absolute requirement for your survival. If you have ever had to cut ties to protect your own future, I want to hear your experience. Please drop your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you all for listening to my journey today here on Senior Echo Stories. Remember to hit that subscribe button and always protect your peace.